Hey there, welcome to a new SVGator tutorial. My name is Astrid and today let's do a seamless loop device morph animation. Let's jump straight into it.
Alright, so this is what I'm starting off with. I have my background right here and I also have my images for reference. So I have an iPhone, I have a MacBook, I have an iMac, and then I have my Apple Watch. So we're gonna start creating the screen for the iPhone. So we're simply gonna grab a rectangle, draw, match the size of the iPhone. And then I want to grab a purple color that I have over here to use it as a fill color, or rather as a stroke color. So I'm going to do that. For now, I'm going to leave the fill as transparent so we can actually see the reference in the back. And then for the stroke width, I want to do maybe like 8. I think that's probably good, maybe 6. And then I also want to add a little bit of a corner radius to match my iPhone. So this same screen, the same rectangle is going to transition into all the different device sizes and shapes. So I'm just going to name this layer screen. And I'm going to turn off that reference for now because I don't really need it at the moment anymore. And then once I get to the next device, I'll use it again. So I want to center this right in the middle. And then I also want to have some guidelines, which I already have here, but I'm just gonna make sure that everything's perfectly aligned. So yeah, just right in the middle, right there. And the first thing that needs to happen is this device here. There's 2 things that are gonna happen with this device. We're gonna have a little notch, you know, the little notch that iPhones have for the front camera. We're gonna make that too with a rectangle, so that's, you know, pretty simple shape. I already have my color here, and then we're gonna add a little bit of a radius too. I'm gonna go all the way up to 7, and then make sure that's also aligned. So I think that looks pretty good right there. And then the next thing that needs to happen with this is that the screen is going to transition and change sizes, and then rotate to turn into our MacBook screen. So I'm gonna go back to my reference here. And I want to turn off that second screen for the MacBook right here. First, let's call this a notch. You can call it iPhone notch. And then I'm going to start adding my animation here. So I'm going to select my screen. And I think if we make it last around 2 seconds, that's probably enough time. So let's animate 2 things, its size and its rotation animation. So let's do size first. I'm going to go all the way to 2 seconds. Add a keyframe there. And then I'm going to go back to the beginning and add my rotation animation as well. And let's rotate it first. So let's grab one of the corners. Make sure you are at second number 2. And that's all it needs to do. It doesn't need to do anything too crazy there. We're just going to rotate it to the left. And then we're also going to resize it. So I'm going to select my resize keyframe right here. And it's very important at this point that you use not your transform tool, which is this one, if you click V in your keyboard, because this is what it's going to look like. We definitely don't want that. We want to keep that corner radius the way it is. So instead of using the transform tool, we're going to use the resize tool. So I'm just going to match the sizes of without moving it, the sizes of my MacBook right here. So all 4 sizes are going to match that. And then that way we can go from iPhone size to MacBook. Now, I also want to make sure that at first, since we're moving this, let's go back to the beginning and make sure that our origin is right in the middle. And then that way, when we move it, we're also going to have to add a little position animation, because since this is just turning into something completely different, it's going to be a little tricky. This is actually going to be the trickiest part of this process. So I also want to add an origin animation here, just to keep that origin right in the center at all times. And then also gonna go back to my position, and then I'm gonna turn off my guides here, and then just move it to like the right position here. So that should be around here. We're gonna work on the notch next. So once more, I'm gonna make sure this is straight in the middle. And then once I play the animation, it's turning into the MacBook. Now that's very boring. So let's do something here. I'm gonna select my size here, and I'm gonna go to my list here of easing effects, and I'm gonna do easing out back. And this is actually gonna make a really cool little bounce effect that is going to make the whole thing look a lot more exciting. That is very slow. That's why it's not looking as good, because we actually need to add the notch animation before it turns into a MacBook. So I'm going to turn off my reference once again. I don't need this for now. And we're going to work on the timing of the animation a little bit better in a second. But before we do that, let's just do the notch animation. So for this notch, I think I want something like, I want it to grow to the sides like this, but if I just resize it with my transform tool here, it kind of loses its proportions, and that's not what I want. So I'm gonna actually turn this into a path, because that way I can grab like only this side and then only this side individually and independently. And then I can do a morph animation. If you go to this list of animations and you don't see a morph animation, it means that you are not working with a path. So I'm going to right click it, and then I'm going to say convert to path. Now, if we go here to animate, we're going to see that new animation option for morph. So we're going to select that. And I think I want it to be from 0 to 1 second here. And if I wanted to grab the different parts of this, we can double click it like I just did, or we can come here to this list and click node tool or the A in your keyboard. So I'm gonna go forward to 1 second here, and then with this A tool selected, I'm gonna stretch it to maybe around here. I think that would look good. So I'm gonna stretch, and then I'm gonna do exactly the same on the other side, trying to keep it consistently like proportional, on both sides. So I think around there is going to look pretty good. And then that way, when we animate it, it goes from the center out. So that looks good right there. Again, a linear animation is very boring. So let's use the same thing again I just used. So easing out back, and it gives it that cool little bouncy effect. Kind of like overshoots a little bit. And then at first, it kind of like shrinks. And we're going to be using that effect a lot in this tutorial. So you're going to see just how much more interesting it makes everything look. So I'm gonna turn this back off here, and I'm gonna hold the initial frames for the iPhone until my notch animation begins. So I just copied like all of these into my into the 1 second frame, and then we can actually do that. So obviously we need the notch to go away and disappear. So once it stops animating, once it finishes animating, and before our iPhone screen starts rotating, let's make it disappear. So I'm going to add an opacity animation to it. So we can go from 100 to 0. That way it goes away once we are rotating the iPhone. So actually the opposite. So from 100 to 0 right here. And yeah, we just go away like that. You can add all kinds of different effects to that. If you wanted to like shrink again, you can do that. It could like, I think that's what I would do, but I want to keep moving in this tutorial because I don't want it to be too long. But you can do something a little more interesting there if you want, and you can add all kinds of little details. But for now, let's just move on to the next step. So once I get to my MacBook size, there's 2 elements that we need to add. So I'm gonna add again another notch. So instead of trying to make this one get to the right position or anything like that, I think I would just want to create a new one, and this one's going to be bigger. So I'm just going to create a completely new notch for my MacBook Pro. So let's turn that on, and I want to center that. I'm just going to get rid of these guides for now. I just need the one in the middle. And then once more, I'm going to add my purple color in there. So we have that. And then I want this to have a little bit of a corner radius. I don't think it needs to be too big or anything. So, well, that's in general too big. So let's just do it a little bit smaller like that. Let me turn this off 1 second. I think that's still too big. Let's shrink until it feels right. I think that's pretty good right there. And then I want this to animate from the top down. So basically like this, as it finishes rotating and resizing our MacBook screen, So let's do a mask for this. I'm going to grab a rectangle, and I want to make sure that the shape looks like it's coming out from the frame while we're calling the device, or the screen actually. So let me hide this. This is going to be the rectangle for the mask. So as long as it covers the entire area of our shape here, we don't really have to worry too much about about how big it is, as long as it's bigger than the actual notch. So I'm gonna grab both, making sure that our rectangle that is going to hide the notch is on top. And I'm going to go right click and create mask. If it's looking a little transparent like this, make sure you select your mask here and then change this to alpha. And then if you move it a little bit, it will go back to the opacity like 100%. So now we can actually do this, and it's masking. So that's exactly what we need for this. So yeah, when we get to this size, that animation should start playing. So let's go. I'm gonna grab my rectangle here. I'm gonna name it notch as well. So that's a notch too. And I'm going to animate its position. So let's select it and go to animate position. This is going to be its final position. So let's go forward to 3 seconds and then paste that in there. And then at 2 seconds, we're just going to move it up and out of view. And then that way it kind of like drops down from the frame of the device. Once more, I do want to add that same ease effect, ease in out back, to give it the bouncy effect. And I also want to add an animation, opacity animation here, because we obviously don't want to see it before like too early. So let's do opacity. So we're going to go from 0 to 100 in the next couple of frames. So let's change this to 0 under opacity, 0 right there. And then this is 100 already. So perfect. We can, if you wanted it to have like an even more dramatic bounce, you can change these values, but I'm just gonna keep moving for now. Now the next thing that I need is the body of the iMac. So, or MacBook rather. So I'm gonna make another rectangle here for that. And I'm gonna keep it very simple. It's just gonna be a rectangle with a little bit of a corner radius. And let's make that the same color. And then the radius, I'm just gonna go all the way up to 15. And once again, I do wanna make sure that it's aligned with the rest of my elements. Just like that. And then I can hide that reference for now. So this is pretty much the kind of like the body of my MacBook. So I'm gonna name that body, or MacBook Body, just to keep things organized. And then at the same time the notch appears, I want this body to kind of like scale up from being hidden in like kind of like in the same line here and then the opacity should also go from 0 to 100. So let me just undo that, and I'm gonna save this final position and size. So we're gonna do a scale animation for it, and then I'm gonna go forward to 3 seconds, paste that in there, and then here I'm gonna make my changes. So for this one, you can use the transform tool, and I'm just gonna make sure that it's right in the middle because so it looks centered, you know. So let's just double check that, perfect right there. And then I also want to do the same bouncy effect, easing out back, and then also an opacity animation. So let's do animation, opacity, and then we go from 0 to 100 to show it. So let's just change that to 0 right there. Let's see what it's looking like so far. iPhone turns into this other screen, and then you get those two elements. Now, you could potentially add more things to this, more details, you know, get more creative with the shapes if you wanted. Feel free to do that if you wish. But at this point, I just want to hold the looks of it, like everything just needs to hold for a few frames so we can actually see the final MacBook here before it starts turning into an iMac. So I'm just gonna hold everything until this point. And then, or I think maybe we'll just go through 3.5 seconds and do that. So, you know, nothing's really changing. I'm just making sure that I'm holding the same size before we start resizing again. And I also want to do like a reverse animation for my elements here. So they kind of come in and then they go back the way they came pretty much. So before I do that, for my transition to iMac, I want to add like a rotation to the entire thing. So I want the whole thing to kind of like rotate to the left a little bit before it transitions into the iMac. So I'm gonna unlock all these things and I'm gonna group everything together so I can grab the entire thing and animate it. So I'm gonna do an animation, a rotation animation here, and it should start just half a second after my other things are gone, like my elements here. So I should like rotate a little bit like this. And we actually don't have to do that manually. So here's how we're gonna do it. We're gonna do a rotation animation right here. And it's gonna go from 3.5 seconds to 4.5, let's say. Let's add a keyframe there, and then we're gonna add a full rotation here. So you can go here under transforms, rotate 1 turn, and it's gonna make it rotate like that. But again, that's a linear animation, so let's add that bouncy effect once again. And yeah, it's gonna make it kind of like go to the left first, and then it's gonna overshoot a little bit once it gets to, like before it gets to its final position. So that makes it a lot more interesting. But I think, you know, as it turns left, this is the last frame where it's turning left. So at this point, I want my notch and my MacBook body to go away. So I'm going to hold the same scale and opacity until that point. So, or actually 1 frame before. So I'm gonna copy my different keyframes here. So I have all of these. And then at this point, they kind of like go back to its original position and original opacity. So I can do it like that. And that way, well, that's not actually working the way I was expecting. Yeah, so my opacity for the MacBook body needs to, oh, I didn't add the hold here. So let's just do that. Copy paste error. So yeah, right before it starts turning to the right side, my notch and my MacBook body kind of like go away. So that way we can transform it into an iMac. Okay, cool. Now we have 2 devices and we have 2 more to go. So let's work on the next one.